Heritage, Habitat and History. We have a number of speakers to speak to this topic who will shortly be introducing. Before we begin, just some house rules. Please keep yourselves on mute while the speakers are speaking. And if you have any questions, please wait for the Q&A section to ask them so we don't interrupt the speakers. You can drop your questions in the chat and we'll come to them after the speakers finish. We will now do a 1-minute silence in remembrance of those whose lives were lost in homeland and around the world due to conflict and state violence. Thank you. So a bit of background about the History and Heritage programme of TIC. The History and Heritage Archive Programme aims to actively research, share and archive material about Tamil history, heritage and culture. This involves partnerships across the diaspora, as we can see through this space today, this transnational space we're engaged in through the power of technology. So when I was sent the programme for today's event, I read through the titles. Sorry about that. When I was sent the programme for today's event, I was looking at the themes that connect them, and it stands out the history and activism, heritage and activism were clear themes. It makes me think about the exercise where you draw a tree, and in this case, the heritage and histories would be represented through the roots and the branches, the roots, and the branches would represent the possibilities of our present and future activism, thus representing the crucial need to ground our activism in the movements, work and knowledge that came before. The legendary Black feminist Audre Lorde warns us what happens when we don't ground our activism, leaving what she refers to as the generational gap. She says the generation gap is an important social tool for any repressive society. If the younger members of a community view the older members as contemptible or suspect or excess, they will never be able to join hands and examine the living memories of the community, nor ask the questions why. This gives rise to a historical amnesia that keeps us working to reinvent the wheel every time we have to go to the store for bread. So she highlights to us the dangers of blocking out the history and activism that have come before. Hopefully this session will be part of bridging that gap. Chairing today's event will be Professor Charan Rudramurthy. Professor Charan, I'm sure, needs a little introduction. He teaches sociology, anthropology and criminology at the University of Windsor. He is an internationally renowned poet, and his most recent anthology, In a Time of Burning, charts the civil war in Sri Lanka and its aftermath. I've also recently discovered he's from the same order as my mum. What a small world. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. And I would like to warmly welcome everyone to this the seminar series. And thank you, Shavina, for introducing me. And Shavina is a youth worker running a program for young activists in East London. She's a former project leader of Center for the Community Development. And she's a volunteer with Abuse Never Becomes Us, or ANBU, which supports survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And thank you for being part of the organizers group for this seminar. And by way of introductory remarks, I would like to briefly inform everyone that we have an exciting set of speakers who are going to discuss and challenge some of the ways we think about and write about the heritage. And in the interest of time, I will be very brief in my introductory remark. I would like to remind everyone that the speakers will have between 10 to 12 minutes to present the paper, and immediately after their papers, and we will have a Q&A, question and answers, probably about, depending on the questions, 5 to 8 minutes. And the aim is to finish everything in 2 hours. Hopefully, all of us would cooperate, and we could have a useful and productive discussion. And one other point I wanted to mention by way of introduction is the whole idea of thinking about heritage is a very political. It has become very political, and it shouldn't be, because heritage is something that got to do with the knowledge production, and to a certain extent, memory and identity and related issues. But when it becomes a contested site, all different kinds of politics take over. And that kind of politicization of heritage can really blunt the intellectual, academic, and the scientific dimensions of thinking about heritage. So that is the key issue for us to think about in the contemporary context in Sri Lanka, in India, and in various other parts where either the conflict or the post-conflict or post-war situations that generate in relation to heritage. So that is one of the points that I would like everyone to keep in mind while listening to the presentations and talks. I will explain a few more aspects about this one in my talk after. So this is, now I would like to invite Dr. Siva Tyagaraja to give us his presentation. And his presentation is titled Introduction to Heritage. And I'm not so sure whether everyone knows about Dr. Siva Tyagaraja. He's a reputed archaeologist and a geneticist. And he's a biological science graduate from the University of Ceylon. Not Sri Lanka, it was the University of Ceylon at that time. A medical graduate from the Faculty of Medicine, University of Ceylon, and a doctor of philosophy from the University of London. During the 1990s, he did a course in archaeology at Cambridge under the guidance of Professor, the very famous academic and Professor Colin Renfrew. He's a well-known writer and academic researcher, having published 24 books and over the past 45 years. He's currently working on a research book on the origins of the Tamil-speaking people. I would like to welcome Dr. Siva Tyagaraja, and you will have 12 minutes for your presentation. Then if there are any questions, we will follow. Thank you very much. Now the floor and the screen is yours. You need to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Honored Chairman, fellow speakers, friends, children, ladies and gentlemen. Heritage is a broad term encompassing all the life aspects of a living community. That the land they live in, their common descent, a common language, customs, traditions, culture, beliefs, religious persuasions, self-awareness, and self-identity. All these comes under the umbrella of heritage. The most important aspects of heritage, what we commonly call heritage, is their cultural heritage. According to the UNESCO definition, cultural heritage is the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes of a society that are inherited from past generations, maintained in the present, and bestowed for the benefit of future generations. I'll expand on this intangible in a few minutes. The term cultural heritage has changed its content considerably in recent decades, partly owing to the instruments developed by the UNESCO. Cultural heritage not only includes monuments and collections of objects, but also includes traditions and living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants. The UNESCO organization has classified heritage as 1, natural heritage, 2, cultural heritage. Under cultural heritage, they speak of a tangible cultural heritage and an intangible cultural heritage. The natural heritage refers to elements of biodiversity, the place and land you live in, including flora and fauna, the ecosystems, and the geological structures. With reference to the Lankan Tamils, the land will refer to the north and the eastern provinces, its geology, geography, places, and the features. Then of course it will include the traditional plants like the Palmyra palm, jackfruit tree, margosa, banana, etc. Then the cultivated plants like rice, tine, same, that's millet, varagu, kurakan, the medicinal herbs, and various spices like ginger and other food grades. Under tangible cultural heritage, this refers to physical artifacts and creations which we can see and touch. These include artistic creations, built heritage, such as buildings and monuments, historic places, and other physical or tangible products. That's something you can touch, of human creativity that are invested with cultural significance in a society and are considered worthy of preservation for the future. These also include objects significant to the archaeology, architecture, science, or technology of a specific nature. So these will refer to your religious monuments, the temples and other buildings, the megalithic or burial monuments, the epigraphs, writing on stone or writing on palm leaves, etc., or writing on plaques. Then the idols we worship, the statues, other created objects, Also the archaeological artifacts, the paintings, all this comes under tangible cultural heritage. That's those physical artifacts and creations which you can see and touch. The intangible cultural heritage refers to traditions we cannot see or touch, but these are inherited from the past, maintained from generation to generation, and bestowed for the benefit of future generations. So these include oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, ritual, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, the knowledge and skill to produce traditional crafts. All these come under intangible cultural heritage. So intangible cultural heritage can only be heritage when it is recognized by as such, by communities, groups, or individuals that create, maintain, and transmit it. Without their recognition, nobody else can decide for them that a given expression of practice is their heritage. According to a UNESCO statement, the importance of intangible cultural heritage is not the cultural manifestation itself, but rather the wealth of knowledge and skills that are transmitted through it from one generation to the next. The social and economic value of this transmission of knowledge is relevant for minority groups and for the mainstream social groups within a state, and is as important for developing states as for developed ones. Now, under the intangible cultural heritage, they speak of the social organization, the social formation, the society, caste, subcaste. Then the ways of adapting to environment, the ways of living together, the collective thoughts within a community, the ways of solving problems which traditionally pass from grandfather to father to son. Then the family values, life values, norms of family, kinship, and lineage, all these comes under intangible culture. Also under them is are your religious beliefs, rituals, ceremonies, festive events, and the traditional beliefs. Also the economic beliefs, the marketing beliefs, money-making beliefs. Then the symbolic or arbitrarily assigned meanings that are passed from generation to generation. The ideas, collective thoughts, the learned behavior, habits, shared behavior. Under these comes your performing arts, like dances, drama, and whatever. So under the traditional views, when we go back to the traditional views, culture can be divided under the following heads. Historical, these refer to the traditions passed from generation to generation. Then behavioral, under that comes your learned behavior, shared behavior, and learned habits. Then the normative, under which comes your ideals, values, the family values, social values, life values, and the collective thoughts. Then the functional, this relates to adapting to the environment, ways of living together, ways of solving problems. Then mental, that's your ideas, ideals, and collective thoughts. Then symbolica, arbitrarily assigned meanings that they are shared by the society. While considering the cultural patterns of the people living in Tamil Eelam, it is important to consider the cultural traits exhibited and transmitted to their children, also by the upcountry Tamils, the Muslim population of the region, and the Sinhalese people living in predominantly Tamil areas. All these need to be considered. The modern views about culture is somewhat different. During the late 20th century, there's a French philosopher called Jacques Derrida. Some of you might have heard of him. He proposed a philosophy of deconstruction, under which he is asking about your existent culture. Does your religious beliefs, the arts, the crafts, the dance and music help to elevate the quality of life of your community, your children, and children's children? That means your culture should be a means to improve the quality of life and economic prosperity of your community. That is one of his, that's a modern definition of culture from Jacques Derrida. So this has made the modern thinkers and scholars to delve into the traditional views of culture, to analyze it and to deconstruct it. They found that, as Jacques Derrida has pointed out, that the old ideas associated with culture, linked to traditional values, language, religion, arts, crafts, dance, and music, are no longer the measurements which determines the quality of life of an ethnic group. So the following has been identified as the most important aspects of culture for the modern times, more important than the traditional notions of it. One is the diet of the Tamils, their nutrition, whether they are taking a balanced diet, the health, your mental health, physical health, the education your children receive, the social equality, gender equality, economic prosperity, preservation of environment and nature. These should come as part of culture. So in the light of the above, the Tamil should review the ideas of culture in order to elevate the quality of their lives and the lives of their children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was perfect timing, Dr. Sivathyagaraja. I really appreciate it. Now it is my turn to talk a few minutes about it was titled Understanding Tamil Culture, or Understanding Tamil Heritage. I would like to begin by saying that my perspectives on Tamil heritage and culture, it comes from a critical heritage studies perspective. That means I view heritage as some kind of a dynamic process, and it is not static. And we need to have some ideas and thoughts about how to move forward, thinking forward, based on our understanding, contemporary understanding of heritage, particularly Tamil heritage. So what is the context in which now we are talking about Tamil heritage? I can broadly identify 4 elements or 4 dimensions or 4 contexts in which that we are forced to talk about Tamil heritage. And the first context, or the first aspect, is in the context of Tamil from Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan state has become, as everyone known, they are enamored by the military success after the genocide in May 2009, and they have expanded their march of conquest to include the heritage and culture, and to make sure that the Sri Lanka is only the Sinhala Buddhist culture. There are no other heritage in that country. So that kind of an assertion, the heritage wars for a con. So the heritage has become a very powerful weapon and tool, an ideological tool in making sure in molding Sri Lanka as singular Buddhist, only singular Buddhist state. That we can see from all kinds of archaeological excavations, quote unquote, done by military and all kinds of other commissions set up by the government, how this entire country and its heritage, where we can very clearly see the heritage of Tamils has been completely either destroyed or erased. It is a kind of epistemic violence that is committed on Tamil heritage there. That is context number one. The context number two is what's going on in India and the Indian state. There also we witness some kind of a larger Indian Hindutva-based hegemony and making Indian heritage look like it is entirely based on Northern Indian Sanskritic tradition at the expense of, or not taking into consideration the contributions by Tamil heritage and Tamils and various other civilizations in various parts of India. So there is again, we see some kind of a hegemonic the formation and creation and articulation of heritage and culture in the name of nation there. So that is that in India, that also has a very clear and a kind of negative impact on talking about Tamil heritage. So that is the context number two. The context number three is how are we going to think about this the notion of Tamil heritage in the Tamil diaspora, right? Because one of the key aspects of Tamil heritage is the language, right? Unlike many other heritages and cultures, Tamil identity is largely based on language. You know, it was not specifically based on any kind of territory. Wherever Tamil is being spoken, that becomes a Tamil territory, right? Tamil Hurun Allulaham. That was the concept. But what happens, unfortunately, in the Tamil diasporic context is the loss of language, loss of Tamil words, and the intrusion of all kinds of other things, whereby one of the key aspects of the heritage is being lost in a very systematic way. I'm not going to say whether it is good or bad, but this is a reality that we need to face in terms of talking about Tamil heritage, because if language is one of the most important aspects of heritage, and there's a challenge in terms of Tamil, in Tamil diaspora, why the generation, second and third and few generations are going to be not speaking in Tamil and not be articulate in Tamil. In relation to that one, it is not only just in Tamil in the diaspora, also in Tamil Nadu, in Sri Lanka, in various other parts of the world where Tamil language is being spoken, the quality of Tamil teaching and the quality of Tamil and the quality of Tamil in various media organizations and the usage and the contemporary usage is extremely poor. Even though we are kind of extremely proud about the antiquity and the power of Tamil language, when it comes to the practical realities and usage, we are not actually maintaining that kind of very high quality. So that is the third context in which we need to understand how to talk about heritage. And the fourth aspect is very important, because there are lots of new evidence in terms of archaeology and genetics that are coming about in Tamil Nadu, particularly. But I'm sure that there are lots of other things would come from northern and eastern part of Sri Lanka. But unfortunately, Tamils there do not have any kind of autonomy and the right to do any kind of excavations, right? So in the case of Tamil Nadu, for example, there's Kuladi and Kodumanal, Adichanallur, and Sivakale. There are all kinds of things. We have received very clear evidence of not only the antiquity, but there are some discoveries, some evidence that are challenging our previous notions about the dating of Sangam literature and urbanization, the possibilities of urbanization. So there's a new evidence coming out in the context of our heritage. So within these four larger contexts, we need, how can we think about and go forward in thinking about and talking about Tamil heritage? So that is that is the key question that I wanted to ask, and I can rephrase this key question by asking all of you that instead of going back to our nostalgic feelings and nostalgic ideas of Raja Chola and Chair and all these kind of kingdoms, and all this our the past maritime expeditions and all kinds of heroic exploits. From my perspective, what we should ask about our heritage is, as a people, as a community, what have we contributed to the universal human civilization? Have we contributed anything unique to the universal human civilization in terms of heritage or in terms of culture? That is the question we should be asking. And there are several answers. To we can identify what have we contributed uniquely to the universal human civilization from the perspective of Tamil heritage and from the perspective of Tamil. And there are at least about 15 aspects I can talk about, but I'm not going to talk about those 15 aspects, but I'm only going to mention only 5 aspects of it. And the first thing that we can convincingly argue is the idea of secularism. Idea of secularism not in the contemporary liberal sense, but if we look at all kinds of Tamil, the whole Tamil literature and the heritage, there's always been a kind of secularism not attached to any particular kind of religion, right from Sangam all the way down to Valluvar, and in between there are several. There's a very unique identity that is secular for the Tamil. So being Tamil is not being Tamil and Saivite, not being Tamil and Vaishnavite. We cannot simply couple them. So that is the first idea and the notion of secularism, which is extremely old in the Tamil heritage context. And number 2, Tamil and Tamil heritage cannot be confined to any particular religion. It has absorbed Saivam, Samanam, Shaktam, the Buddhist, all these and Christianity and Islam. There's a whole range of religion that have become part and parcel of Tamil heritage. So we cannot simply say that we are Tamil. I am a Saivite and I am a Tamil. If you want to be a Tamil, you need to be a Saivite. There are certain groups of diasporic organization and also some organization in India and Sri Lanka, they argue, if you want to be a Tamil, you need to be a Hindu. Very powerful. These are small groups, but my point is that we cannot simply argue because the Tamil heritage is beyond religion. It absorbs all kinds of religion, but it's beyond religion. So that is the second contribution and the key point that I want everyone to think about. And the third one is the idea of treating nature as a central part of life. The way of life is very closely related to nature, whether it is from Sangam literature or even down. The whole idea of placing humanity and humans at the center of the universe, that is a serious problem, what we call the problem of Anthropocene. We have completely neglected the nature and all the environmental issues and plants and animals and birds and all these kind of things. And we decided to place the human beings at the center. Everything is for the human. Everything is for profit. This whole idea is what we call Anthropocene, which has never been part of the Tamil heritage, whether it's from the Tanai tradition or from living closely with the Tanai. Even the Tamil identity has never been revolved around this particular kind of exploitation. So we can convincingly argue based on the Tanai tradition and the Tanai concepts and the nature that we prioritize. We thought and we conceptualize human beings and Tamils as part of the nature, not the nature is a subservient thing for us. And this is a very important, it's a kind of a post-humanistic contribution that the Tamils have given to the universal human civilization way before, which is being now not properly recognized. And the fourth aspect, the fourth dimension is our idea of labor, the coolie. Tamil means coolie, whether it's a migrant labor, refugee labor, maritime trade and thing, we have been coolies. Our coolie, our coolie, the laborer, has been responsible for industrial revolution in Europe, and the automobile industry, development of automobile industry in North America, because of and the creation and making of all kinds of various cities in various parts of the world, partly because of colonial times, partly even pre-colonial. But what is missing is that we do not. So this are in our heritage, the labor needs to be celebrated. Coolie needs to be identified as part of our heritage, but we are not doing it because we are ashamed to say that we are coolies. We need to be proud of being coolies and labor, but we are not doing it. So this is an idea. This is the fourth idea that we, in terms of heritage, talking about heritage, need to think about how we need to re-articulate some of the aspects that we have been missing in the past. And the fifth dimension, or the fifth aspect, and of the contribution to universal civilization, is the presence of multiple identities and the presence of multiculturalism for more than 2,600 years. We don't really have to go to contemporary social science literature on multiculturalism and diversity and inclusion, etc., that has been practiced, that has been there. I'm saying not in the nostalgic sense, but in the sense of reality, that we have practiced it, that has been part and parcel of our heritage, but we fail to develop it because we have placed our notions of heritage and culture on something completely different, the king's story. So my argument, in short, is to re-evaluate what we have been thinking about Tamil heritage and identify the positive and progressive element that we have contributed towards universal civilization, and then move forward. So I hope the seminar, the presentations, the seminar will help us move in that particular kind of direction. That would be extremely useful and good. Thank you. And as a moderator, I would like to ask if anyone has any questions for Dr. Siva Tyagaraja, or if you have any questions for me. There are two options. We have a few minutes. You can either send your questions via the chat box, or you can raise your hands and we will invite you to ask the questions. We will not have much time, but probably we can take about 5 minutes for the Q&A. If not, we can move ahead and invite the next speaker.
Another contribution of the Tamils is the universal brotherhood. Yadam Ure Yavarum Kelir.
Can you identify yourself? Because I can't.
I'm Siva Tyagaraja again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
One of the important contributions of the Tamils to the universal civilization is the idea of a common brotherhood among humans.
It won't be brotherhood. It will be sisterhood too.
Yeah, sisterhood too. And then, I mean, the Yadam Mure Yavaran Kelir is one of the Sangam literature poet, Pudam Kunraner. So it's an ancient contribution of the Tamils. Is this universal brotherhood, which is elaborated by Thiruvalluvar as well.
So if there are Anurag, can you identify who are there are two participants who would like to ask questions, and I don't think I can see their hand. I can see them on my screen.
Can you see me, please?
I
am Ponkulindran from Canada, Ontario. Can you see me, please? There's so many people.
There are so many people, but
I'm Dr. Seren. I am Ponkulindran from Canada, Ontario.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. Okay. My question is very simple. One question. செம்மொழி என்று சொல்லுகிறார்களே, செம்மொழி என்று தமிழுக்கு இந்தியாவில் செம்மொழியாக அதை ஏற்றுக்கொண்டார்கள். எங்களுடைய கலைஞர் கருணாநிதி அதை செய்தார் என்று சொல்லுகிறார்கள். யாரு செய்தாரோ அது செம்மொழி என்று ஏற்றுக்கொண்டார்கள். அது ஒரு சிறப்பு. அப்போ எங்களுடைய அந்த செம்மொழிக்கும் எங்களுடைய வரலாற்றுக்கும் என்ன தொடர்பு இருக்கிறது? ஆகவே மற்ற சில மொழிகளைப் போல் ஜூயிஷ் மொழி அல்லது சில மொழிகளைப் போல் எங்களுடைய மொழிகளையும் ஏற்றுக்கொண்டபடியால் எங்களுக்கு சர்வதேச முறையில் when I say internationally it is been accepted as a செம்மொழி. செம்மொழிக்கு ஆங்கிலத்தில் என்னென்று தெரியல, some word appropriate, பட் தமிழிலே நான் பேச விரும்புகிறேன். அதை பற்றி உங்களுடைய கருத்து என்ன? இரண்டாவது, குமரிகண்டம். குமரிகண்டம் என்றதை வச்சு நான் சில கட்டுரைகள் எழுதியிருக்கிறேன். அந்த குமரிகண்டத்துக்கும் எங்களுடைய தமிழ் சங்கத்துக்கு முதலாம் சங்கம், இரண்டாம் சங்கம், மூன்றாம் சங்கம் மேலே மேலே நகர்ந்து போய் மதுரையில் முடிந்தது என்று சொல்லுகிறார்களே, அதோடு மெடகஸ்கார் ஆஸ்திரேலியாவோட இணைத்திருக்கிறது என்று சொல்லுகிறார்களே, இதை பற்றி ஆராய்ச்சியாளர்கள் நாங்கள் அதில் என்னென்ன ஆராய்ச்சிகள் செய்து எங்களுடைய கலாச்சாரம், பண்பாடு, வரலாறு பல ஆண்டுகளுக்கு முன் 20,000 30,000 ஆண்டுகளுக்கு முன்பே இருந்தது என்று பல கட்டுரைகள் எழுதுகிறார்கள். அதை உறுதிப்படுத்துவதற்கு முடியாமல் இருக்கிறார்கள். மூன்றாவது கேள்வி, கீழடியில் இருந்து பூநகரியில் கண்டுபிடிக்கப்பட்ட புதப்பொருள் ஆராய்ச்சி பொருட்களுக்கும் கீழடிக்கும் தொடர்பு இருக்கிறது என்று நான் ஒரு கட்டுரையில் வாசித்தேன். எங்களுடைய புஷ்பரத்னமும் சில ஆராய்ச்சியாளர்கள் சொல்ற இந்திரபாலா இப்பொழுது அதில் ஈடுபடுவதில்லை, அது தன்னை விலகிக் கொண்டார். ஆனால் இதை பற்றி இவர்களுடைய எங்களுடைய ஈழத்தில் இருந்து என்ன ஆய்வுகள் இந்த தொடர்பை பற்றி செய்திருக்கிறார் என்பதுதான் என்னுடைய கேள்வி. நன்றி, வணக்கம்.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, I will give you the summary of his question. His first question was, it's about the notion of classical language. When Tamil has been declared as a classical language, so what would be the impact of the thing internationally? And the second question is about the Kumarikandam, or the notion of Lemuria, and whether there are any kind of solid scientific or other evidences to say whether that was actually a fact or not. And the third question was about some archaeological sites and archaeological possibilities of archaeological excavation in Punagari and parts of northern Sri Lanka, and whether they have any kind of links to Killadi and in the excavations in Tamil Nadu. So these were the three questions. I will very briefly answer them. First of all, yes, Tamil has been a classical language. It's a classical language, and we do not. The issue about the classical notion of classical language in the international, or especially North American and European context, is the North American and European academic context is completely dominated by Eurocentric vision. For them, the classical language and the classics is Greek, right? So it has been extremely difficult for the other groups and other communities, other classical languages to be part of this kind of a thinking in academia. So that is going to be a huge struggle in making and letting them understand that Tamil is a classical language. But that's a struggle, but we need to pursue. And the second thing is, in thinking about this Tamil heritage, we also need to know or understand there is a huge heritage industry in the Tamil context. Simply banking on myth without evidence, all these kind of nostalgia, right? So when we say certain kinds of things that this is this much old, we cannot simply make our arguments based just on literary evidence or just on myths. We need to have archaeological evidence. We need to have historical evidence. We need to have all kinds of other evidences. Literary evidence can be only one. We cannot simply base our decisions and arguments simply on myths. In the context, in the question of Lemuria and Kumarikandam, as far as my reading and research goes, so far, there isn't any kind of very strong, solid scientific evidence to justify. Second, even if it's there, it's going to be extremely difficult for us to connect that one to some kind of a proto-Tamil or any kind of a Tamil ethnic identity, because ethnicity is a much later phenomenon. So I wouldn't want to go into that territory. That is why I emphasize in my talk that we need to have a critical look at heritage, and we need to be thinking forward, right? And the final question, yes, there are a lot of similarities and a lot of possibilities in the northern Sri Lanka and possibly in eastern Sri Lanka if we have the right and power to do scientific archaeological excavations in those parts. And we can easily, there will be a possibility to link some of them to with what we have, what they are finding in Adichanallur and other places. Of course, there was some finds in Anekotai that was actually corresponding to the finds in Adichanallur. But there was no chance, there was no possibility for all kinds of extended excavation in the Tamil territory there. So that is the answer. And in the interest of time, I would like to move to the other speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Rachel Yogi, and she is going to be talking about the memory practices, collective reflection, and hope in the London Tamil diaspora. So Rachel is a lecturer in criminology at the University of Kent. Her work explores issues of state violence, memory, and resistance in relation to the war in Sri Lanka, including post-war Sinhala Buddhist authorship of space and Tamil diaspora memory intervention. Over to you, Dr. Rachel.
Thank you very much, Sharon. It's really nice to see everybody. Thank you very much to everyone at TIC for organizing and for inviting me. So I want to use my time to consider the turn to heritage as a cultural and political resource, as a way of understanding the past through frames of resilience and resistance, rather than solely trauma, exclusion, and displacement. So I want to offer a reading of how heritage might be embraced into a holistic framework of Tamil collective memory, and how that might offer a more hopeful reading of Tamil experience. So I want to talk about a particular collective memory intervention, a shift in memory practices in the London Tamil diaspora in 2019. Many of the contributors today were actually involved in this process, which was a 2-day exhibition hosted by TIC on the weekend of the 10th anniversary of Mullabaikal, which was titled after Dr. Siva's book, The Tamils of Lanka, A Timeless Heritage. The exhibition project was imagined and begun by Varad Akmer, the executive director of TIC, and he assembled a wide range of contributors in the UK, in Tamil Eelam, and across the world. And he set about organizing an exhibition that would create a new interactive space of memory. Memory practices on the weekend of Mullabaikal were centered primarily around street protest previous to this. And as the years passed, with no accountability for war crimes committed against the Tamil people at the end, and the enormous loss of life, the numbers of protests were dwindling and people were losing hope. Varad Akmer hoped to supplement protest by trying a different medium, trying an exhibition to engage the younger generation and to design material, dynamic, and creative ways to showcase Tamil history and heritage. And crucially, he insisted that the focus of the exhibition should be resilience. The aim was to demonstrate the rich heritage of Tamil-speaking people and to excavate heritage from the everyday. So to place value on material and immaterial heritage by including it in an exhibition, to reflect on unique Tamil heritage reflected in architecture, in food, nutrition, utensils, instruments, cultural activities, and in forms of protest and survival. As many here will know, Varad Akmer died nearly 2 months to the day before the exhibition. It was sudden and unexpected, and his loss was devastating. So under this new, very raw layer of grief, the community around TIC pulled together to organise this exhibition as a tribute to Varad Akmer and out of determination to bring what we called his final dream into being. Volunteers contributed enormous amounts of time, energy, creativity, and knowledge to the process. And it was a very heterogeneous team. Some were born in the UK, some who arrived here in the 80s and 90s and earlier, and some who had survived Mullabaikal and come afterwards. The organising process was intense, it was moving, and it was generative. Importantly, it was intergenerational, as Shavina mentioned at the start, and created an unprecedented space for open discussions about history, heritage, and what Tamilness is in the contemporary moment. Through these conversations, we came to an acute awareness that curating this exhibition was an intervention into memory and into memory practices. So memory makers, activists, or workers in the literature are defined as those who work individually or institutionally to give shape to social remembering and forgetting. The exhibition offered a new way of coming together to remember, and it invited others in the community into this space, where personal and collective memory was valued in a holistic way within this broader reflection on Tamil history and heritage. So this was an invitation, and it was a hopeful invitation. It was hopeful of creating dialogue, of sparking interest, of resurrecting histories and cultural practices. It was hopeful of making the familiar strange and worthy of appreciation. But it was also explicit about the threats to Tamil life and heritage, not only the physical violence experienced by the community, but the erosion of language, the erosion of tradition, and particularly spatial traditions on Tamil land. So much has been dismantled and destroyed and threatened. But even with those threats in mind, hope persists. What exists can be preserved and replenished. What was destroyed can be remembered, it can be honoured and perhaps restored. And we can learn from the past the importance of holding tight to tradition and heritage. The hope with the exhibition was to explore the community's emotional attachments to the past, to the identities produced, and to open up possibilities for the future. And I think this was what Varad Akmer wanted with his insistence on resilience, to evoke a sense of possibility, that the past is complicated. It's not only traumatic, but the Tamils have always innovated and resisted and created despite oppression, and that the future is not pre-written or foreclosed. Power can be challenged, and revisiting memories of resistance sustains contemporary resistance. Memory activism, as Gutman defines it, is essentially an oppositional endeavour. So it's the strategic commemoration of a contested past outside of state channels, and it aims to influence public debate and policy. And these practices differ from official or traditional memory practices because they're interactive, they're accessible, and they aim to engage non-traditional participants. So memory activists, which we can call the exhibition team, use cultural practices, community-based educational and artistic work to reframe public debate on the past. And this is what the TIC exhibition did. It filled an enormous sports hall, and it was organized around 5 themes: history, political resistance, art and culture, the consequences of conflict, and a room dedicated to Mullavicle and the experience of Mullavicle. Nearly 2,000 people attended the exhibition over the course of the 2 days, and most stayed for hours, exploring the exhibition, attending talks, screenings and workshops, and connecting with friends and family. Throughout the exhibition, there was a focus on people's stories, using photography, artistic depictions and responses, graphic novel excerpts, and film. The Tamils of Lanka exhibition opened up an expansive space to have an encounter with the past. So it aimed to help people connect emotionally with Tamil culture and heritage, to consider heritage as the everyday practices of life in the homeland and in the diaspora, and also to engage in material ways with particular moments in history. So we can consider these material exhibits as a means of generating affect. So by affect, I mean emotional reactions and entering into an atmosphere or a structure of feeling. So the notion that people were moved by these material exhibits. So for example, a makeshift tent was reconstructed to demonstrate how people lived in the months before Mullavicle as they were pushed day by day toward that final strip of beach. And volunteers also cooked congee for visitors to taste, the only food which was available for people in those final months. And cooking and sharing congee has become a way of remembering Mullavicle, of marking the anniversary, which is a new cultural practice that emerged out of grief. The construction of a section that was dedicated to the de facto state was also an effective encounter. So it was very busy with photographs and symbols of Tamil Eelam, and it felt like stepping inside a moment in time when institutions were being built, when it felt like a state was coming into being. And revisiting that or feeling it for the first time felt moving and important. Visitors were prompted in a non-explicit way to reflect on and acknowledge the destruction of statehood as a discrete political and emotional loss, but also the hope and possibility of that moment felt tangible. Memory scholar Anne Rigney calls for a recentering of hopeful narratives despite the horrors of the past, arguing for an enduring attachment to something of value in face of its present absence and past denial. So we can draw hope from the past and use it to shape our activism, our aspirations, and our futures. Rebecca Solnit, who's one of my favorite writers, talks about hope really beautifully, where she says that hope locates itself in the premise that we don't know what will happen, and that in the spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. At the TIC exhibition, the invitation to explore heritage and history was written through with reinvigorating narratives of resistance. And by presenting Tamil cultural and political realizations, it pivoted visitors toward hope. Tamil resilience and resistance was emphasized, survival, innovation, heritage, and creativity, not only persecution and victimization. So I think the exhibition was a model of how to draw the community into conversations about the past in an engaging visual material medium. It was vibrant, it was dynamic, and it was uplifting. And most importantly, it created a real sense of community and space for discussions. And it was an inclusive one where the past could be revisited and reimagined as one of hope and resilience. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. We have 4 more speakers to go. What I would like to suggest everyone is, I have already received some questions from the audience, and I would like to collect all the questions, and at some point before the end of the seminar, I will ask all the speakers to respond to those questions. So I would like to invite everyone to send their questions by using the chat box. And I would like to ask all the speakers to, when they are done speaking, please monitor the chat box and see if there are any specific questions for you, so you can prepare your answers. So we will have some time towards the end of the seminar to address all these various questions. So this is the best way to have give enough adequate time to all the speakers and also to address questions. So thank you very much, Rachel. I would like to move on with our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Ahalya Bala. She's going to be presenting her paper on developing a network and organizations for social change in the younger generation Tamil diaspora. Dr. Ahalya Bala is currently based as a teaching fellow in criminology. She holds a postgraduate qualification in sociology, criminology, social research methods, and education, and her research interests revolve around Tamil diaspora politics. The screen is yours, Dr. Ahalya Bala.
Thank you very much, Professor Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see so many people here. It's quite a huge turnout. I'm really pleased to be involved in today's event and with such an interesting and diverse line of speakers. And I can already see quite a lot of crossover in themes between the talks and Shavina's introduction, which is really wonderful. And today I'm going to be talking quite briefly about my research, doctoral research on younger generation Tamils in London, which I began several years ago and have since completed. The research falls within the broad themes of today's seminar on heritage, habitat, and history. And the History and Heritage Unit of Tamil Information Centre, who is running today's event, and the Centre for Community Development, they're very keen to share knowledge about the richness of Tamil history and heritage, particularly with the younger generation who might be unaware of it, and also to protect and promote this heritage. As the other speakers have already spoken about, heritage could refer to traditions, practices, behaviours, physical artefacts, and values. So my talk today comes from a place of developing Tamil heritage, where younger generation Tamils, so those who were born or raised outside countries of origin, shape Tamil heritage for future generations in innovative and meaningful ways. And I think maybe a good place to begin is to talk about my journey in this research area, because I'm a younger generation Tamil myself, and what this could mean in terms of Tamil heritage, habitat, and history. So I was kind of thinking some people in the audience might be younger generation Tamils. So this is speaking to them, but everyone else as well, okay? So whilst I was studying for degrees in criminology and sociology, these notions of terrorism emerged with case studies referencing Sri Lanka. So I began exploring aspects of my ancestral homeland and its recent history, which has been tainted by war and conflict. And during my master's, I was encouraged by my lecturers to pursue Tamil-related issues and further study, perhaps because it was seen to be underexplored or original. I mean, I think I was like the only Tamil person in an entire cohort of 200 students, something like that. And this kind of originality is the cornerstone of academic research. And my thirst for Tamil-related knowledge increased, and I began developing ideas for PhD research. And this timeline, it coincided with the end of the armed conflict in Sri Lanka. And I finally settled on a project which seemed very relevant and accessible at that time. So I wanted to study protest or social movement activism amongst younger generation Tamils in the diaspora, because large sections of this group had participated and taken the lead in marches, demonstrations, sit-ins, hunger strikes, sadly, self-immolation as well, human chains, political lobbying, boycott campaigns, and seminars, lectures, and workshops focused on genocide. And as a concept, so just to put it out there, social movement activism, which protest falls under, can be described as two or more people who are collectively pursuing social change. So I share this very brief journey with you because I've come across a number of younger generation Tamils who are quite curious and intrigued about my academic choices and what the research could possibly mean. And even for me, I'm still working it out. It's changed from the day it started to today, and in 10 years' time, it will change again. That's how things flow in academia. And in terms of heritage, what it means now could mean something different later on. So on a personal level, academic research is one route into unearthing Tamil history, but also confronting what Tamil heritage or culture is and what it means to have your body, your mind, and your heart spread across different habitats, different countries, particularly when one country was colonized by another. So here I'm talking about the UK or Britain and Sri Lanka. And beyond the personal, sharing the research, whether it's through academic publications, seminars and conferences, or through teaching and developing modules on courses at university, means that important aspects of Tamil history, heritage and habitat are shared, developed together and promoted for Tamil speaking communities, but also for other communities that might feel marginalized. So moving away from me now, I want to talk about the younger generation Tamils in the research that I carried out. And whilst I was studying their activism, it became apparent that there was a wide and diverse network of Tamil social movement organizations, Tamil student societies, as well as younger generation individuals who are focused on pursuing positive social change for Tamil communities in Sri Lanka, but also in the diaspora. So this is in the years following 2009. I kind of wrapped up the research, let's say around 2015. And I'd like to focus specifically on Tamil student societies, which are student-driven organizations in universities. And the research found that Tamil student societies in London and beyond were founded or developed as a response to the end of the armed conflict in Sri Lanka and allegations of human rights atrocities committed by the state. And in 2009, when the war was reaching its brutal end, Tamil students had actually tried to access the existing Sri Lankan student societies to raise awareness about state crimes and the dire humanitarian situation and identified appropriate ways to respond. However, they were met with resistance from existing members of the Sri Lankan student societies, which would capture Tamils, Sinhalese, Burghers, all sorts of different ethnic groups, right? And these existing members did not want to venture into what they considered to be contentious politics. So some Tamil students took it upon themselves to set up Tamil student societies, which focus specifically on issues afflicting the Tamil community. So what sorts of things were younger generation Tamils doing through these spaces? Well, they have been able to organize protests and memorial events, host lectures, exhibitions and documentary screenings about human rights atrocities in Sri Lanka, host book launches and reading groups as educational initiatives about Sri Lanka, and also work collectively with other Tamil student society across the UK to release media statements, for instance, on UN resolutions that are passed on Sri Lanka at the Human Rights Council. Tamil cultural shows, which are hosted by student societies and often involved comedy, fashion, food and dance, also started to incorporate acts such as parade drumming and war-related drama and rap music to confront and to represent issues in the Tamil community. And other socially conscious actions included organizing workshops to discuss tensions and inequality within the Tamil diaspora relating to gender, sexuality, domestic violence, caste, and mental health. So interestingly, Tamil student societies were also spaces where younger generation Tamils could be mentored by students with more experience and a wider network of recent graduates. So information and resources relating to the events that I'd mentioned and political campaigns were passed on, and advice and support were also offered in the selection of degrees, modules and dissertations which could benefit the Tamil community. So for instance, those studying law could specialize in human and minority rights. Some people also talk to me about changing their degrees and maybe going towards less conventional degrees. So for instance, I think a lot of people will appreciate that Tamils often choose subjects relating to medicine, maybe accountancy and things like that. And what I found in the research is that people wanted to branch out into the social sciences, so sociology, criminology, journalism and all sorts of different things like that. And so rather than seeing Tamil heritage and history as something to be imparted to younger generation Tamils or something that they passively consume, this kind of research demonstrates the ways that younger generation Tamils were challenging and developing Tamil heritage relative to contemporary context. So here we're talking about the end of the war, really. And they exhibited autonomy from other Tamil organizations, which have been historically dominated by older generation Tamils, by taking ownership over matters which are important to them. And so just to wrap up here, I think that younger generation Tamils clearly have the drive and capacity to generate social change and make positive contributions to Tamil heritage. And this is something that should be acknowledged and celebrated in the Tamil community. And I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ahalia. That was an excellent work and delivery. I have two announcements before we move forward. If you have any questions for each speaker, please you can either send them to us by via text or via chat box, or you can keep them with you, and after all the presentations, we will have some time for questions and answers and discussions, right? Now I would like to move on to our other speakers. It's going to be a joint presentation by Dr. Kavian Kulasabhanathan and Nalini Sivadasan. Kavian Kulasabhanathan, he's a physician in pediatric emergency medicine in London. And he's a researcher at the Department of Social Policy and Intervention at the University of Oxford. He's also part of Race, Health and coordinating member of the People's Health Movement in the United Kingdom. His work focuses on the socio-political determinants of health, particularly race and class and community-centered models of care. And he is going to be talking about promoting Tamil heritage and identity in the UK and the West, the role of Tamil youths. And Nalini is a journalist at BBC Asian Network. She has more than a decade of experience in journalism and specializes in video. Her role involves exploring issues and news related to diaspora communities from India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And she is going to be focusing on keeping Tamil history, human rights, and culture alive, learning from the others. So now I invite Nalini and Kavian to talk to us. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, much. So we actually decided to combine our topics because we saw that there was loads of synergies between them. So we're going to be looking at, keeping Tamil history, human rights and culture alive, learning from others. So we decided to look at this very much from a youth perspective. Most of the young Tamils in the UK, we've grown up and spent more time actually with other communities than necessarily communities in Sri Lanka. And especially in London, living as a community in exile, we also live amongst other communities who are in exile. So Palestinians, Kurdish people, so many different groups of people that we live in. So we think it's kind of good to actually learn from them. We could go back in time and we could pick out loads of examples from what other communities are doing, but obviously we're pressed for time. So we decided that we're going to focus on contemporary examples of what communities are doing now, and seeing perhaps, reflecting on perhaps what we as the Tamil community can take away from what these other communities are doing. We've decided to pick out one thing from each community, which they've done, which we feel is unique, which has helped to keep either their history, human rights or culture alive. But obviously there's so many examples, and feel free to contribute what, your thoughts on what other communities are doing. Just a caveat, neither myself or Kavian, we are not academics, we're not experts on these communities or even our own community. So there might be kind of gaps, but also as well, we want to emphasize that there is so much that the Tamil community is doing, has been doing. And so this isn't kind of like, we're not trying to be negative on what the Tamil community is doing. It's just a kind of way of perhaps a springboard for discussion and perhaps looking at our struggle in a slightly different way. So, and hopefully we'll encourage solidarity as well with other groups. So I'll pass it over to Kavian now.
Bro, thanks, Nali. Can everyone see the screen? Is it up? Is it working? Fab. All right, brilliant. So we've drawn from a range of different communities, and I guess we're kind of using them as, rather than case studies, I guess just like points of inspiration, really. And I suppose it's worth emphasizing that within each of these communities, there's a multitude of incredible things that they've done. And we've generally tended or tried to pick out maybe one dimension, one face of something that they've done that we might take some inspiration from as a Tamil community. So I'll start off, and we wanted to speak a little bit about the Palestinian community. Earlier this year in May, we saw kind of the latest flare in the Israel-Palestine conflict, triggered by Israel's planned expulsions of Palestinian families from the Sheikh Jarrah, kind of a predominantly Arab neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And it's left in excess of 250 people dead, at least kind of 240 of those killed were Palestinians in Gaza, nearly half were women and children. Police violence, as I'm sure you will all know, has always been a kind of part and parcel of the Israeli occupation over the last century, or last half century, and surges of casualties tend to kind of make Western headlines. I suppose that the difference in this particular iteration is how it's been reported on. It's kind of played out far more on social media with a more first-hand public narrative of the conflict. And so generally, while again, as I'm sure you all know, the Israeli forces have an overwhelming military advantage over Hamas and the Palestinians in terms of public narrative, that's really starting to slip. So this is a picture of a Palestinian protester kicking a tear gas canister away during kind of some of the clashes that were happening in Ramallah in the West Bank. The last few years have seen a shift in where and how people kind of get their news about the region, moving away from more traditional news outlets, the BBC, Sky, kind of newspapers, and really social media started playing a more substantial role, kind of even within the Israeli-Palestine conflict as early as 2014, which was kind of the last significant flare. But I suppose this year, what's changed is that the phenomenon has been even more apparent with kind of this new generation of young Palestinians and Palestinian resistance riding on a global consciousness that's been sensitized by protests globally over the last couple of years against police brutality or racialized police brutality, and kind of Hong Kong pro-democracy protests, and a variety of other causes that have really been thrust into kind of more of the world's eye, I suppose. And videos and pictures from those on the ground, frequently live or near enough live, are able to bypass editorial gatekeeping, and they can reach millions really quickly and rapidly through platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And so the consumption is really occurring raw at the source, and it's given a voice to those Palestinians at the scene. So individuals and the social media hive mind are then left to make their own minds up about trustworthiness of sources and content. And really it's a way of challenging perhaps the more insidious bias in reporting that we see through more traditional news outlets. And these videos were being shared by people around the world, not just traditional people involved in activism or social justice, but largely influencers and people who might not normally talk about politics, from beauty vloggers to makeup artists to musicians. And local journalists suddenly had a global audience. And I suppose a corollary of that has been that quite significantly, certainly not to as great an extent as it should be and needs to be, but there's been an uptick in news outlets in the UK and the West amplifying some voices on the ground instead of speaking for or in place of Palestinians, which is what overwhelmingly is the status quo, really. And one such voice that we want to spotlight is a chap called Mohammed El-Kurd. So he's a poet and an activist who's used really social media, particularly Instagram, to talk about what's been happening to his family, and his family were in this region being evicted or proposed to be evicted by Israeli settler organizations. So I'm going to play a really short clip that went viral just to demonstrate the manner in which he speaks, basically. And I suppose kind of what are the takeaways from showing you Mohammed El-Kurd and talking about all of this, I suppose, is that there are, of course, several sources of Tamil news directly from the ground, the likes of Tamilnet, Tamil Guardian, kind of, to some extent, Colombo Telegraph in the English language. And really it's about thinking, how can we be more conscious in amplifying the voices of those based back in Ilenge via social media, through the likes of TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and being critically, obviously being critically aware of the safety of those back home. And I think this doesn't necessarily just apply in the context of acute conflict, as in the case study that we've just spoken about, but more broadly as well. And the second point was that there are loads of brilliant short film and documentary makers, vloggers, artists, young journalists. And really, can we as a diaspora and broadly as a Tamil community think about really platforming these people? So let me hand over to Nali.
Right, so I want to look at the Sikh community. I think they are a very vocal community whose numbers actually in the UK and the world is actually quite small. So there's around 420,000 Sikhs in the UK, which make up 0.7% of the population. I think the number of Hindus is double that. Yet Sikhs have really made their voices heard in the UK, and there's lots of aspects of Sikh culture and religion we can look at, but I wanted to look at how they've become known for server, selfless service. So server originated in Hinduism, but it's become more associated with Sikhism. So in practical terms, this manifests in Sikhs helping strangers, as well as people in their own community. So this could mean giving food to homeless people, rebuilding homes after earthquakes, providing food parcels to vulnerable people during the pandemic, or giving food and relief to Rohingya refugees. So Server is part of their religion, but I would say that it's also become part of Sikh culture. And why I think it's so interesting is that I think it's become a path or a bridge between Sikhs and non-Sikhs. So by helping strangers, people that might not know much about the community, Sikhs are actively interacting with outsiders, and it allows them to learn about their religion. But I would also go one step further and say that it's almost like a form of soft power for Sikhs. So Sikhs, through service, Sikhs can also teach and educate non-Sikhs about human rights issues. So there's that stuff like the recent farmers' protests that were happening in India, or their history, such as 1984, when the Indian Army stormed the Golden Temple. So in terms of takeaways, perhaps that we could use from that, I was thinking about building bridges between communities and creating solidarity with other communities is really important. And I'm not sure it's something that we do enough. You know, by reaching out to others, the Sikh community's identity has not been diminished. I think, in fact, it's been strengthened and kept alive. Also, could we highlight or use elements of Tamil culture or heritage to make our community and our issues more accessible to others? So I think Dr. Siva mentioned earlier about brotherhood. Is that something that we could, I don't know, amplify and use it to connect to other communities? And yeah, I'll pass back to Kavian.
Lovely. So the kind of the third community that we wanted to draw inspiration from was the Black British community, and specifically we wanted to speak about kind of and really spotlight the Black Cultural Archives. So the Black Cultural Archives, the BCA, were founded back in 1981, really as a collective response to the traumas and injustices faced by the Black British community as a whole, but kind of typified perhaps by events such as the New Cross massacre back in 1981, in the year that it was founded, when 13 Black young people were killed and 50 injured in a suspected racially motivated arson attack, but also underwritten kind of by systematic kind of oppression, racism, through legislation like the Police and Criminal Evidence Act back in 1984. Its kind of establishment was driven in significant part by the work of a brilliant educationalist called Len Garrison, and kind of one of the ringing kind of statements at the time when he was looking to establish something like the BCA and going through the process was, as he said, where are our monuments? Where are our martyrs? You know, there's no real mark of Black British history in the UK at the time, and that was really his driver behind starting all of this. Kind of specifically, the BCA sought to provide a space for education in Black British history for those that were seeking it. You know, as a community, its contributions were and continued to be systematically undervalued, and the Black Cultural Archives were built with the mission to record, preserve, and celebrate Black people in Britain. And back in 2014, they kind of opened a new purpose-designed building in Windrush Square in Brixton. Physically, it holds a museum, a gallery, a cafe, as well as kind of learning spaces, and it hosts exhibitions and events. Kind of past exhibitions have focused on the Rastafari movement in Britain, the Windrush generation, and also Black British music. And at the moment, if you guys have a chance, you should definitely go down and see. They have a brilliant exhibition on called Before Them We, which explores the lives of grandparents and broadly intergenerational relationships of African descent in the UK, and thinking about how we archive and preserve oral histories. Crucially, the Black Cultural Archives, they've acted as kind of a community archive and a dynamic, active, living hub rather than kind of a stale academic archive or academic one. And for example, at the time of the Windrush scandal, kind of when it came to light a few years ago, it became a site of solidarity and collective support. They hosted legal clinics, and it was a point of contact where people could, in a safe space, ask critical questions. They've also invited artists to engage in month-long research residencies, exploring the archive as a whole, and it's really allowed Black British history to come to life. Although this was, it was moved online, it's been hugely successful. So what kind of the key takeaways from this? I suppose it was that the practice of archiving is a powerful means of preserving memory. We celebrate the past, and it acts as a concrete starting point for those wanting to explore stories that largely have been written out of history by the hegemonic party, the so-called victor, looking back. Obviously, there's huge resonance with TIC's Tamils of Lanka conference, and we know there are plans to create a more permanent museum, something that I think would be an enormous boon for both the Tamil community and beyond. The second thing was that obviously, whilst the pandemic has shown that connecting virtually has been possible for all of us, including the BCA, we really feel that a physical space as a unique convening power, kind of facilitating connection with both the archive content and with each other ourselves in a way that really isn't possible online. And this has been seen through spaces like the meeting rooms and learning areas and cafe at the BCA. And the last thing really is that archives can and they should be alive. Crucially, the Black Cultural Archives is a space to explore contemporary issues as well as historical ones, and really actually juxtapose them. So aside from the TIC exhibition, it's not really something that, certainly as far as I've seen, we've massively done in Tamil spaces. And I think creating an interactive community space really enables particularly the younger generation to engage in and critically investigate their own, our own stories and our own identities, something that, for example, the BCA did through Windrush Waves, an exhibition that kind of specifically targeted young Black Britons, using poetry, artwork, film to tell stories of the Windrush generation. So we really need to do more to engage young people, and I think we can learn a lot from this.
Great. So I'm going to talk about the Zoroastrian community. So Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest religions in the world. I find that people don't know that much about it, but if you know who Freddie Mercury is, he's probably the most famous Zoroastrian, the lead singer from Queen. So Zoroastrianism, it shares a common heritage with Hinduism, and it's influenced other religions such as Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Like I said, it has its roots in Iran, but after the Arabs conquered the country, many people were made to convert to Islam. So many Zoroastrians fled to India, where they're known as Parsis. There they thrived, and they became known as kind of businessmen and entrepreneurs. And many Zoroastrians kind of migrated to other parts of the world, including the UK, the US, and Australia. So even though they've been really successful, there's a massive big problem in the community because it's actually on the point of extinction. So there's only around 100,000 to 200,000 Zoroastrians worldwide. And the reason for this is because there's very strict laws, which mean if you marry out of the faith, your children are no longer seen as Zoroastrians. And there's no possibility of conversion either. So you have to be born into it. But there's also a lot of debate happening about the moment about whether these rules are religious or cultural. And some younger Zoroastrians are challenging them, saying that the actual religious scriptures were never so rigid. But the thing that I want to focus on that the Zoroastrian community have done is a project called the Return to Roots trip. And so this is a trip that the Zoroastrian community is doing to engage young people from around the world by taking them on trips to India and Iran. It aims to help youngsters better understand the religion and the culture and Zoroastrian identity, because there was a fear that there was growing disconnect between young Zoroastrians in the diaspora and their kind of communities in Iran and India. So it might make you think of other programs that have been done by other communities. So the Jewish community, Armenians, Taiwanese communities, they have similar programs. With this specific Return to Roots trip, it includes visits to Zoroastrian temples, libraries, as well as kind of enjoying cultural aspects such as food. There's a conference that takes place, which is run and hosted by young people. And I've been to actually one of a similar type of conference run by young Zoroastrians. And I thought it was really, really fascinating because it was completely run by them. They looked at issues which were kind of controversial, and many of them were, openly critiquing elements of the culture or religion. And I found it very refreshing that the organizers had kind of included, the kind of traditionalists, as well as the people that wanted to reform and kind of wanted to create the dialogue between them.
As well as that, you know, families who can't afford to send their children on the trip, they can have it subsidized. So, you know, it aims to kind of make it affordable and accessible to Zoroastrians around the world. So in terms of takeaways, I mean, is this something that Tamil community could replicate? You know, we do have a huge diaspora, it spans continents, and there is a lot of money where perhaps we could fund, you know, people who couldn't afford to make a trip. You know, could we organize trips to Sri Lanka and India to help young people engage with human rights, culture, and identity? You know, there's often groups of young people that go to Sri Lanka to do charity work, but are there ways of incorporating culture and history too? And how do we do it without kind of putting people at risk as well in terms of the situation on the ground? And I think as well, like the thing that I really took away from the Zoroastrian community is the fact that they're able to talk about quite difficult issues. And sometimes I feel like even in the younger generation of Tamils, we can be quite polarized in terms of politics. So can we create spaces where people of different views can come and talk about them? And can we also critique, you know, or talk about cultural elements like, you know, Samadhi, like, you know, period puberty ceremonies, you know, is that something, issues like that, can we create spaces where we can talk about the future of things like that? So back to Kavya now.
Thanks, Sally. So I am aware of time, so this is the last kind of case study, and I'll keep it brief. So we wanted to look at the Kurdish community, and I think, you know, probably this is something that hopefully this isn't the first time that people are meeting this. And I think actually, even though we're not going to speak so much about this one, it's maybe one of the most important case studies or kind of points of inspiration to reflect on. There's kind of several natural parallels between the Tamil and Kurdish struggles, kind of beyond the vision for greater equity with respect to things like women's rights, and also the fact that there was kind of a secular armed resistance. The most striking similarity is through the kind of so-called them both being nations without a state, as it were. So for those of you that aren't familiar, and the kind of the Kurdish identity is a super multifaceted and complex and nuanced issue, and apologies for trying to summarize it in such a short period of time, but there are between 30 and kind of 45 million Kurds living spread over Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Armenia. And that's not including the diaspora population, of which there's a couple of million dotted around. Like in the case of Tamils, there are dialectical differences, although the range of kind of distinct groups of Kurdish dialects spoken are much further apart than kind of within the Tamil language. And again, with respect to faith, whilst most Kurds are Sunni Muslims, there are several other religions practiced by substantial numbers of Kurds, mirroring kind of the heterogeneity found in our own community, in the Tamil community. Someone interesting that we wanted to spotlight, that struck both of us after listening to his stand-up, is a comedian called K Kurd. So I'm going to play you a really brief video, if I can get it to work and get it to start at the right place. So I think we're going to struggle to get to the right section, so sorry, but we can circulate a link, but it was only a 30-second clip anyway. But kind of K Kurd he's a Kurdish British mainstream comedian, and he's kind of played, you know, at big venues at the Hammersmith Apollo, for Live at the Apollo. He sold out shows up and down the country. And perhaps what's most striking is the frankness with which he speaks about his identity and the kind of the naturally associated politics that comes with that identity. It's a consistent feature in his work. I mean, he literally has Kurd in his name, and he almost ubiquitously speaks to his Kurdish identity in his material in one form or another, if you listen to anything that he's done. I think there are several take homes here. I think the first is the importance, really, and I kind of massively want to emphasize this, is the importance of standing in solidarity with communities that have distinct but shared stories and histories, not in a transactional way, not in a just we show up for you and you show up for us. Well, that is part of solidarity, but really in a way that shows kind of true solidarity with other struggles in a deep and meaningful way. The second thing was that I think, while we only need to look at the likes of Ramesh Ranganathan to see the limitations of totally hollow representation, the second point I wanted to make is with regards to the potential power that Tamil artists, whether writers, comedians, musicians, literally whoever, who might be able to leverage their kind of platform to speak candidly about our history, our heritage, human rights or lack thereof back in Ilenge, is something that is worth reflecting on, I think. And the example of K. Kurd was to demonstrate that political vocalness isn't necessarily incompatible with being in the mainstream, which I think sometimes some artists, as they gain more traction, think potentially. And I suppose the last point, which both Nali and I feel really strongly about, and I think, Nali, you're going to speak to this as well in a second, but it is really exploring the scope for a more inclusive and unified Tamil diaspora, kind of globally. So not just Sri Lankan or Indian Tamils, but thinking about Malaysian, Singaporean, South African, Mauritian, Caribbean, and beyond, to truly bring together a stateless nation of Tamils, not only kind of in its shared culture, history, or heritage, but in celebration of the diversity of histories, it's spanning indentured labor, migration, colonization, and recolonization when people have moved to other places, and that place has been colonized as well. All of these things form part of our history and our stories as Tamils. And I think we really neglect those things. So I'll throw it back to you, Nani.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So to wrap up, I mean, I'm going to just continue from that thread that Kavian has mentioned about solidarity. Forging alliances with the wider Tamil diaspora. I think sometimes when we think about the Tamil diaspora, or we get very consumed by India, and we look to India as kind of the natural kind of partner, or Indian Tamils, but actually the Tamil diaspora is so vast and so wide, and I think by perhaps looking at other Tamil diaspora groups, like Kavian mentioned, these are other communities who have often faced discrimination and oppression, like Tamils in Sri Lanka. Perhaps we can actually kind of move forward and come up with solutions. So yeah, what we've listed, obviously they're just a few examples, and they're mainly to spur conversation. And it's interesting, Ahlia mentioned in her talk about perhaps some of the things that's happened in the past, and we were thinking about things that perhaps have held us back. And I think, there has always been a focus on young people studying, professions like medicine and accountancy and law. Obviously these are great, but how far do they go in terms of keeping our Tamil history and human rights and culture alive? And has sometimes the pursuit of these vocations meant that Tamil literature and arts and culture have been ignored? Also, no disrespect here, but sometimes as the younger generation, we feel that sometimes the gatekeepers to Tamil culture and identity often are elders. It's great, this discussion, there's so many younger people here, but sometimes having these gatekeepers telling younger people, oh, this how Tamil you are, this can put off the younger generation. And so that's something to think about. And Kavian's just going to finish off.
Yeah, really picking up on that. I think something that's interesting, and it's kind of, we're putting out there again. This is a presentation is a starting point for discussion. So it'll be interesting to hear what people think. But there are a huge number of elements and faces and dimensions to Tamil heritage and culture that we should preserve and that we should celebrate. The importance of language specifically, I think, is at the forefront of our consciousness, which is obviously important, but I think we also need to incorporate thinking actively and more broadly about, our values, our culture, our human rights, and all of that into all of this together. I don't know. I think that's something that maybe as a community we can reflect on, because yes, language is central, and yes, kind of the encouragement of upcoming generations to learn and preserve that language is important, but also there are always going to be people who don't learn the language for a variety of complex reasons, and sidelining those people is ultimately unhelpful, I think. And I suppose kind of the very last thing I wanted to say is just that, Tamil identity, it is not limited to religion, it's not exclusive to language, it's an identity that really, we feel anyway, welcomes others. as we've seen in part through the Tamil struggle in Ilangai, we feel it's not based on a desire to kind of return to an idealized old historic past, but really it's about centering values and communities to create a progressive shared identity of kind of Tamils. And that's something that we really need to discuss more, I think. So thanks very much to TIC for hosting and creating this space.
Thank you very much, Kavian. Thank you very much, Nali. This is a very useful and insightful intervention. And it is also very important to understand and underline the notion of solidarity, not just across the borders and across various oppressed communities, but how we can create creative solidarities with other communities. I would like to take a few minutes to share one or two important ideas. The first idea is that in Ramallah in West Bank and in Jerusalem, there's a group of Jewish activists, historians, and architects and writers. What they do in Jerusalem and Ramallah is to map and organize the tour for all kinds of people to indicate how this contested territory has been systematically erased and it was imposed on a Jewish identity in terms of heritage and history. So it is exceptionally powerful kind of a solidarity that those architects and the writers and the historians created. So they take you to every single settlement, every single archaeological site and explain, this is exactly what the thing, because it's extremely complicated, because when two groups are claiming heritage and antiquity on the same territory, in the same area, especially in the context of a conflict, it is going to be extremely difficult. So that is where the idea of the creative solidarity comes in. And second, I am glad that you brought this out, because the whole idea of this seminar, there is an implicit tone running in the focus of the seminar is how we can include the contemporary commemorations, remembrance, pain, and trauma to our heritage, right? The heritage, when we speak about heritage, it is not just the kind of heritage of the past, but we continue to add certain important aspects to the heritage. In the case of the Tamil, in the case of Palestinian, in the case of Kurdish, this is the key, and the Vietnamese too. How do we incorporate commemoration, remembrance, history, pain, and trauma as part of our heritage? We cannot help it, right? So one of the last example in relation to this is one of the challenges that the communities are facing. We are facing. How are we going to incorporate, for example, genocide and Muliwaikal as part of our heritage? We cannot. We should be. And then how, right? So one other point for all of us to think is we all know what happened in Vietnam at Dien Bien Phu, the end of US imperialism there, the defeat of US at the Dien Bien Phu, right? So the Vietnamese people wanted to make the Dien Bien Phu territory and the area as a heritage site. They have been trying to get it accepted by UNESCO because that is a historic and extremely important heritage aspect for the Vietnamese people. But that is not happening because US and the other countries will never allow that kind of a quote unquote political thing to be part of a heritage. We will be facing the similar kind of thing in the future when we try to organize and commemorate genocide and trying to make the genocide as part of our heritage, right? But there are several challenges ahead, but as you guys indicated, we need to take. We need to challenge them. And this will work only in the context of solidarity with the others, right? So I do not want to go into more details. We will have some time for question and answer later. So I would like to move on very quickly to our final speaker from University of Jaffna, Ahilan. Ahilan will be talking to us about claiming the unclaimed, mapping Tamil heritages. Ahilan is a senior lecturer in the Department of Fine Arts, University of Jaffna. He's one of the most He's one of the greatest Tamil poets, contemporary Tamil poets. He was born in Jaffna, Sri Lanka. He has published 3 poetry collections, Padungukuli Natkal, Samarakavigal, and Ammai. An English translation of the poems, Then There Were No Witnesses, was published by Mavenzi House in Canada in 2018. He's one of the poets in the collaborative book project Poetry and Art that is called The Tea, A Concoction of Dissonance, with artist Vaidehi and poet Geeta Sukumaran. And it's also important to mention that perhaps Ahilan as a poet is the first Tamil poet to bring the whole notion of individual trauma and collective trauma into Tamil poetry. So that is one of his greatest contributions, not only to our art and literature and culture, but also to our heritage. Now, Ahilan, over to you. Your microphone.
So thank you, Jaren. Vanakkam, good evening and good morning to you all. So I'm truly grateful to the History and Heritage Unit of TIC, CCD, and particularly Professor Cheren, who invites me to share some of our own experiences in Jaffna, particularly in the northern Sri Lanka, and views on protecting the heritage among the Tamils in a wider sense or across the borders. So I would like to share my screen. Anud, can you share?
Yes, yeah.
It's share? No.
Yes, please. Yeah, you can share now.
Thank you.
Okay, you're sharing.
Yeah. Okay. So the body of my talk divides into 2 parts. The first part is mapping the backgrounds and our efforts to make awareness in the local community on heritage. The second part mainly talks about the issues to protecting the heritage properties, especially among the local community last 20 years, the period we were working. But the history shown, it was started in 1980s when the Ganga Chatram at the Satratai Chandi in KK's Road near Jaffna Bazaar was demolished by the Municipal Council of Jaffna. So in this context, it was happening last 40 years. Sometime it was parallel to the armed struggle of Tamil militant groups too. This prevailing situation is deeply questioning us the meaning of loudness of claiming the ethnicity or cultural identity of Elam Tamils or the Tamil community in a wider perspective by the Tamils. Please remember, this talk is very sketchy and short in aims only think to further or beyond the prejudice or our stereotypical boxes. In 2002, the result of Norwegian talks, peace talks between government of Sri Lanka and LTT, one of the main decisions was made as opening the A9 road, Kandy to Jaffna highway for the public after almost 18 years. The people and vehicles moving in rush in both directions. The day-to-day life become much easier than earlier, but the suspicious on the stability of peace strongly in the people's mind, and they were aware of the next dangers in terms of war through their historical experiences. But another unexpected danger was entered silently through the same A9 road with an innocent face was the heritage market. They were using the community's ignorance and unawareness of the importance of heritage properties for their cultural and historical living. The southern Sri Lankan antique or heritage dealers very quickly built up a local network or creating Local network, creating a local agent for acquiring the heritage properties. Through this network, antique buyers easily identified their tasks and directly entered each and every corner of the villages to buying culturally valuables, such as colonial period furniture, temple vahanas, and old bronzes in at very low prices under the label of Palanchama, old properties. It means no use further or not a fashionable object, but they are selling those at high price in the cosmopolitan cities like Colombo as a fashionable trendy object for the high class taste and status. My department, the Department of Fine Arts, already aware the importance of heritage property in writing or understanding the local or regional artistry, apart from the colonial notion of art, and especially in the art and craft bipolarity and its politics. In this background, this unexpected situation created a big tension among us. Actually, we did not know how to handle the situation. We tried through direct and indirect power authorities to stop the movements of such properties was not working well. The evacuation of such properties from its own soil was happening in a high speed. Finally, we thought the only way in this juncture is getting down the ground and work directly with the community. We thought at last it make awareness on the importance of heritage properties for the community development in terms of evidence of history, representing the cultural identity and the knowledge sharing, so on. On this, we were doing the following awareness works in order to change the situation positively, at last in some extent. Unfortunately, the working our group was too small in numbers because our department was very small with few students and staff. In this background and other related negative conditions in the society, it was become a huge burden for us, like in Tamil, Kurivithalai in Pananga, it's a big burden. But that time we are decided to face it because it was affect us very personally too. I remember in that time, our mind always in a feeling of lost and tense extremely. So that pushed us towards work like, first we were started to campaign program. The we of us is a very small group that I already told to you, 2 staff, myself and Dr. Shanadhanan, and 6 students. We were using fancy dresses like monkey, bear, and hobby horse, and big drum and dancing to attract the people together. When the people once gathered, we were started to talk the importance of heritage properties and requested them, please not sell your valuables. If you sell properties, is selling the identity and the evidence of your historical past. We always use this phrase as kind of motto. So these photographs shown to you the activity. So this photograph, you can see me, they are with a red shirt and one of our student also there. So this is the first thing we did. So we were using the marketplaces, bus stops, temple areas, street sites, junction, and sometimes the school grounds for perform the campaign. The second, issuing the handbills, one for general public and other handbill targeting the small children, which target to educate them on this issue on heritage. For this, we were using a conversation pattern that was between grandpa and grandchildren. So the third, we are organizing meetings for especially advanced level students and teachers, and talked about ongoing issues and enduring the problem of heritage properties in Jaffna, and asked them to set up a heritage clubs and school museums in the schools to develop the community with aware on heritage. So the other thing, arrange a poster and essay competition for school students on the importance of heritage for the community. The next step, the important activity was using newspapers for writing essays on heritage and advertisements, create the awareness on heritage for the community in multiple levels. So these are the ads, some of the ads. So our efforts to stop the evacuation of heritage properties from its roots were not working well practically. This situation pushed us to think the importance of documentation and archiving. We started that in the same way with our small groups without any support. Even we did not have a proper camera and the knowledge for doing such activities. It was happened actually in a trial and error mode, and losing a lot, gaining a less. This is the situation. But we are keep going on this regard. So in this background, Dr. Shanadhan and my colleagues pioneer documenting work called Mudusam in important opening. This was concentrate to researching, documenting, and exhibiting the local heritage as a foundation for build up the local artistry. It was started by him before the issues, but I was discussed with you earlier in later part of 90s. The outgrowth of this activity, the department had few important exhibitions such as Tanjavur glass paintings in Jaffna, Ravi Varma's painting in Jaffna, early photography in Jaffna, so on. This is one of the Buddhism exhibition for the traditional lamps, Vilaku. The way I encouraged the documentation of heritage properties, we were organizing the meeting for cultural officers, the officers who they are handling the cultural issues in their respected divisions or areas in the villages. We requested them to document the heritage properties in their respective divisions with the help of Grama Sevakas. But they have many practical issues due to the traditional working pattern assigned to them by the authorities above them. In this regard, the Department of Fine Arts arranged a workshop for them in collaboration with the Jaffna Secretariat and the Department of Sociology, University of Jaffna. The workshop mainly concentrating to educate them to the importance of heritage and how to do the proper documentation in our level best. So in 2010, we faced another issue through the Vadakin Vasandam, the developing project for northern Sri Lanka. Under this project, the road development and expansion is the predominant target of development. Again, we faced a big issue on safeguarding the built heritage of Jaffna. Especially it's threatening the heritage buildings and the town planning of Jaffna. We were mainly insisting the importance of KK's road, especially in Vanarpani area, because the road was carried the memories and histories of the 19th century rise of Jaffna. But I'm not going into details on this because the time will not permit to talk more in details. In this backdrop, the Department of Fine Arts and some other academic friends were writing letters to the ministers to think differently to the road expansion project. We also met few high authorities with our alternative ideas of Jaffna town development or planning. Nothing was happened in positive and expected way. Please remember the main block or resistance with non-acceptance mainly came through the local authorities, I mean the Tamils who are in the positions. That time, I decided to write these issues in the newspaper every week as a column. This was made some awareness here and there. Finally, I print that essays in a book form. So finally, some adjustment and declaration happened by the government authorities. They decided to reduce the size of the road, and this was safeguarding some important buildings. But the spirit of old Jaffna was destroyed and gone forever. We not invest our heritage for development, including so-called tourism with its many folders. But the story of destroying and abandoning continually happened. in the history of the war for protecting heritage. Who are the stakeholders of this cultural genocide? The government of Sri Lanka, always we said. If you ask me, I would like to say yes and big no. So I am entering into my second part quickly. Actually, we're not ready to take any measures to protect our heritage. The we sometimes includes me and you too. The local community is still not aware after 20 years or the 40 years on their heritage. I respect very few people. They are spend their own money and collect and preserve their heritage properties. Most of the temple, churches, and schools are demolishing their great monuments with its own particular idioms and finally reappearing as a colorful marshmallows kind of thing. Marshmallows, I would say. The domestic architecture of Jaffna is destroying every day, and we have number of groups in this dismantling activity, and they all strongly connected by the antiquity market at Colombo. If anyone or group can have any alternative perspective on this, the authorities treated them as enemies under the title of the enemies of development. I understand the authorities are the separate class with its own aspiration of gaining topmost post in their career. But they are not ready to think differently or think from their local community perspectives and benefits. Local government has some space to creating their own bylaws, but any of the local government is not ready to think in that way. Even the municipal council also work against to protecting the heritage in two ways. One, using appropriate laws, it has already exist. They are not using the bylaws. Creating a new measures to protect. For an example, the present mayor of Jaffna set up a heritage protection group, but he recently announced to expand the hospital road without the center parking. Center parking is a peculiar phenomenon of Jaffna's urban fabric with green light. In addition for this, some local public was questioning on this, but no answer from there. This silence indicates the non-acceptance and not too ready to listen anything from anybody. I would like to call this is a strategical silence exercising the powers. In these 40 years, the members of any political party did not take any move on this regard. There were no any big incentive to set up a museum or digital museum for Tamils till now. I came across few initiatives in diaspora, but I don't have much idea on that. In other way, few moves happened to protecting or build up institutions like museums, but in the way to set up those without any discipline-oriented guidance, finally because wrong example and make more damages. These are the few things came into in my mind. The people who talk about heritage claim, the unclaimed, as treasure of the community in multiple sense. Sorry. The people who talk about heritage claim, the unclaimed as treasure of the community and rightly pointed out its role of representing and handling of the identity in multiple sense. It is playing a role of evidence, is the basic demands of writing history from archaeological elements to the colonial past in a wider sense. The oppressed and marginalized group like us, the evidences of history is very important as we know, but why we are not that much aware on this. My final question is, do you think our thought on nationalism or in search of identity and our claim for existence in broader sense are very superficial? Thank you.
Thank you, Achlan. And thank you, everyone. We have a few more minutes for questions and answers. So if you have any questions for any of the speakers, either you can send it in the chat box, or you can raise your hands and we will invite you to ask your question to any of the speakers.
Can I say something?
Hello.
Hello, Natkunan here. Hello, Natkunan here.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
My thinking is, you see, I was born in Malaysia, so my Tamil was my mother tongue, or my first language was English. And I came to Sri Lanka or Ceylon in Alavati and Mahajana College. And that's the time I know about Tamil. And Tamil was taught, or I learned as a subject. The finer part, unfortunately at the time, the finer part of Tamil was not implemented onto us or imposed on us or developed on us. And then later on especially in Alavati, there are a lot of Tamil scholars.
Can you please ask a question directly to
the question is
to any of the speakers?
Like for us,
because we have very limited time left.
The question is, like people like us, how we can contribute to the Tamil society in a way we can sustain and develop our heritage.
So any of the speakers would like to respond to his question? Probably Achlan. I would also like to remind everyone, if anybody wants to ask a question in Tamil, நீங்கள் தமிழ் மொழியிலையும் கேட்கலாம். நாங்கள் தமிழ் மொழியிலையும் மறுமொழி சொல்லுவோம் அல்லது மொழிபெயர்ப்பு செய்யலாம். Achlan, you have any response to Dana's question?
Yes. I think we need to aware first, because most of the Tamils, my experience in inland especially, they are not much aware. So, if you use the newspaper, if you use other medias to communicate and say the importance of heritage and why the heritage is important for the community development, how it's part of the development because we may know Somsky once said, without the cultural development is not a true development. So the thing is, I think we need aware first to keep our culture in a different way. I agree with Nalini. We are not gatekeepers of Tamil culture. We need multiple ways and multiple perspectives on how to include, because we in other way we know the Tamil culture. What we are speaking today is very elitist in the manner, especially in inland. Actually, we are exercising the colonial way of practicing. So how to include all, or so-called quote unquote others, into the main discourse, or how to flexible in the practice of practicing the heritage. So my answer is, first we have to aware on heritage and try to keep what we are having today, is to keep or preserve somewhere. Even the photographs, even the some vessels, or even the stories. So because we already talked about that, no, the heritage is the scholar Laurent said the heritage is not an object or something. It's a kind of the consciousness, kind of stories, the narrations and everything. So everybody, we have something, even if you living in diaspora somewhere in Canada, not in Alavati, because we lost everything in Alavati. No, you have the memories, you have something, so you have the snapshot or something else. So we try to start our own small archive first and contribute to the commonplace or set up something in a different way. The youngsters already talked about the archives and some other mode of preserving methods and everything. So the digital heritage is one of the main heritage divisions today. So we have a space for making a digital museum for Tamils somewhere. So we can work or we can move towards that, I think.
Thank you, Ashland. Are there any questions for Dr. Ahelia, Dr. Rachel, Dr. Carvian, and Nali?
Yes, I have got some
Sure.
questions for
I know
everyone.
the participants have raised their hand. I couldn't locate them. Can you invite them to ask their question?
Hello. എൻ്റെ പേര് മണിവണ്ണൻ நான் sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
என்னென்னு சொன்னால் நான் உங்கள்கிட்ட கேட்குறேன்னுட்டு எங்களோட கல்ச்சர்லேயே வந்து எங்களோட ஹெரிட்டேஜை மெயின்டைன் கூடாத விஷயங்கள் இருக்கின்றதா? நாங்கள் வந்து உண்மையில் வந்து ஒரு டோடோன்னு சொல்லுவார்கள் எங்கள் மொரிஷியஸில், அது மாதிரியான ஒரு தமிழர்களுக்கு ஒரு பாதுகாப்பின்மை இல்லாமல் கிட்டத்தட்ட ஆயிரம் வருஷங்களாக வாழ்ந்து அதில் 2000 வருஷங்களாக வாழ்ந்து வந்த இனமாக இருக்கின்ற இதில் நாங்கள் எங்களை ப்ரிசர்வ் பண்ணணும்னு அவங்களை யோசிக்கிறது இல்லை. ஏனென்றால் எப்போ வந்து வேறு ஒரு இனத்தால் ஓவர் ரன் பண்ணக்கூடியவர்கள் தான் தங்களை எப்படி ப்ரிசர்வ் பண்ணணும்னு பார்ப்பார்கள். கிட்டத்தட்ட ஒரு 50 வருஷத்துக்கு முதல்தான் எங்களுக்கு அது மாதிரியான நிலைமை ஏற்பட்டு 50-70 வருஷத்துக்குள்ள. அதுக்கு முதல் வந்து நாங்கள் வந்து ப்ரொடெக்டட் பீப்புளாகவும் ஒரு பெரிய ஒரு பவர்ஃபுல் பீப்புளாகவும் தான் இருந்திருக்கிறோம். அப்போ எங்களுக்கு பிரச்சனை என்னென்னு சொன்னால், இன்றைக்கு என்னொன்று இந்த யாதமோதே ராவரன் கேளிரன்ற அந்த பெரிய மனப்பான்மை, ரெண்டாவது வந்து பழையன கதையிலும் புதியன புகுதலும் என்ற கருத்துக்கள் எல்லாம் வந்து எங்களுடைய அந்த இப்போ வெள்ளக்காரனை பார்த்தீங்கன்னா அவங்க ஒரு சின்ன சின்ன விஷயங்களையும் ப்ரிசர்வ் பண்ணி கொண்டே இருப்பினும். ஏனென்றால் this country has been run over, நான் லண்டனில் தான் இருக்கிறேன், run over by so many people. So they have got that preservation mentality, where we didn't have that mentality. That is what is contributing to the fact that we are not preserving our culture heritage, because we think that that itself will preserve it. So I am very saddened by the case that even our people are not understanding what Island and others try to preserve something, but they are not maintaining that. So how we are going to bring awareness of our culture, and how we are going to stop the deterioration? Because the question is it part of our heritage to ignore our heritage itself, as we are like a dodo? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to comment, Ashland?
Yes and no. I think the speakers who talked before me talked in very broad manner to understand heritage or preserving heritage. So in our case, in inland, is different from the people who living outside of Sri Lanka, because we right now have the primary level, because still we have facing the primary issues on protecting the site, make awareness to people like that. But in the abroad, or also the academics should think what Charan said, like a critical thinking on heritage. We have to rethink, revalue, and think how to establish the what you call very not authentic, the very powerful heritage, not past, yes, because the heritage is not only the past, heritage is the present also. So we have to adapt all those new ideas and thinking brought up into our thinking process and establish something, I think.
Thank you. I see Maha Ramakrishnan has a question. Can you come on screen and ask the question, Maha Ramakrishnan?
Sorry, I can't come on screen. Okay, but my question is for Mr. P. Ahilan. Do you think locals should resist takeover of land? For example, like those in Trincomalee resisting takeover of Hindu temple land. Do you think they get enough support from academicians based in North and East who specialize in the study of heritage archaeology?
Yeah, the thing is, already Charan several times mentioned, in inland, we have different issues, because you may know the people who are protesting to acquiring their lands or the temple lands, they are, the government take a, what do you call, they took them to the prison and put the cases in the courts, and so many issues happen. So that is the one thing. But I agree, the academics and the activists, and also I want to say the political parties, especially in Sri Lanka, talking about very loud nationalism. Nobody's raise their hands or voice in their own respective disciplines. I am not taking the academic should act like a politician like academician, but in their respective disciplines, they have to raise. So if you are, if we are an academic background or academician, we can talk in our way in the sense through the logistics of the disciplines. So you're right, partly, yes, definitely. Definitely these politicians, definitely I have a strong criticism. They all are very loud in nationalism, that and this, but nobody entered last 40 years in this issue.
Thank you. We have 10 more minutes for everything, question and answer, and for vote of thanks. If anyone has any question for other speakers, I welcome them. Let me know. Okay. So I see two participants raise their hand. Who's going to go first? I can't see their names.
Visahan.
Visahan, okay, go ahead.
At the beginning, I have invited so many younger generation from Sri Lanka and also from India, especially from India is organized by Mr. Virumandi, one of the famous men in the genetics. And the reason at the beginning, I have noticed more than 100 people were here. Due to lack of English knowledge, many of them left. Please, can you summarize all these speeches, wonderful speeches in Tamil language by anyone? At least before they leave, I like to ask them to stop. They said the wonderful speech may be, but they couldn't understand. Can anyone, Mr. Charan or Mr. Tiaraja, can you summarize?
Visahan, it is possible, but I do not think we have adequate time to summarize all the speeches and give it now, because we only have 10 minutes left. But what I suggest is that we will do a summary and then circulate it among all the people who attended. And I think the organizers and Anurag should take care of it, because there are lots of critical issues that have been discussed and presented. So it is possible, but it is not easy. So that's what I can say right now. And I would like to quickly move on to other questions. I will. There's some time for one other question, because there were questions from other speakers, which I would like to address in a few minutes. And if there are no questions, I would like to ask Ahalya or Kavian, Sivatia, Gradu, and all the other presenters to make a final comment.
Oh yeah, so this is Ahalia here. I don't mind making a final comment. Usually I'll speak very candidly here. Usually I don't like giving seminar talks or conference kind of talks and things like that, because I think about what can come out of it, what's the point in it. Something feels a little bit different today. I'm not sure what it is. I think it is because of that youthful injection where we've had 3 speakers from the diaspora kind of talking about their experiences, their research and whatnot. And then we have the lovely combination of the older generation speakers as well. And for me to hear or see the connections between and the threads between all of these talks, there's something quite special there. And Sharon, you mentioned about summarizing our talks and putting Anuraj in charge of that. I think it's a really wonderful idea, because I think things might be able to grow out of this seminar talk. Leading on from the exhibition that Rachel had talked about, and moving forward, and the ideas that Nalini and Kavian have shared, it feels like things can, it's like breathing fire back into things again. I feel like we can take some positive steps forward. I'm not sure when, but it's just nice to know that there's that bubbling energy that's still there, just still simmering, and it's good to record these things in written form.
Thank you, Ahalia. And I see Kulam. Yeah. Kulam has raised his hand, so you have the floor. You can ask your question.
நான் இதில் என்னென்ன கேள்வி ஒன்றும் கேட்கல. இந்த கருத்தை சொல்ல விரும்புகிறேன். என் பேர் குலசபாநாதன், லண்டனில் இருக்கிறேன். இது ஒரு முழுக்க புலமைசார் கருத்து பகிர்வாக இருந்தாலும் இதுக்குள்ள அரசியலும் பின்னி பிணைஞ்சுகளோடு இருக்குது. ஒன்று எல்லாம் ஒரு இலையில திரிக்கப்பட்ட விஷயங்கள். இந்த கருத்தரங்கு அல்லது இந்த கருத்து எதிர்காலத்தில்
உங்களுடைய இணைப்பு சரியில்லை குலம். எங்களுக்கு வடிவா கேட்குதில்லை. ஹலோ, குலம், உங்களுடைய இணைப்பு சரியில்லை. இணைப்பு துண்டிக்கப்பட்டிருக்கு.
இப்ப கேக்குதோ?
சரி, சொல்லுங்க.
இதுல ஒரு 20% கூட இளைஞர்கள் அல்லது அடுத்த 2வது 3வது தலைமுறையை சேர்ந்தவர்கள் இல்ல மாதிரி தெரியுது. அதை நிவர்த்தி செய்ய வேணும் அந்த ஒழுங்கமைப்பாளர்கள் என்றதை சொல்லிக்கொண்டு, மற்றது இந்த அகிலன் வந்து முக்கியமான விஷயங்களை சொன்னார். அது போல விஷயங்கள் நான் இங்கே பேராசிரியர் பீட்டர் ஷாக் இருக்கிறார். ஸ்வீடனில் கொஞ்ச காலம் நான் வாழ்ந்த காலத்தில் அங்கே ஃபால்க் மியூசியம் என்று சொல்லி மக்கள் கண்காட்சி
குலம் திருப்பியும் உங்களுடைய குரல் வரையில. நாங்கள் இதை முடிக்கிற நேரமாது.
அவர்கள் அந்த ஒரு நாட்டிலிருந்து தப்பி ஓடி வரைக்குள்ள கொண்டு வந்த அந்த பொதிகளையும் அந்த பொதியை கொண்டு வந்த சூட்கேஸை கூட வச்சிருந்தார்கள். அது மாதிரி லண்டனில் உள்ள ஜூஸ் மியூசியத்தில் பல விஷயங்களை வச்சிருந்தார்கள். இங்கே நேஷனல் ஆர்கைவ்ஸில் வந்து போலிஷ் மக்கள் தங்களுக்குள்ள ஒரு நாடு கடந்த நிலைமையில உண்டாக்கின ஒரு அரசு அந்த முத்திரை சேகரிப்பில் இருந்த இந்த என்வெலப்ஸில் வந்து கணக்க கதைகள் எழுதப்பட்டிருக்குது. அது மாதிரி கணக்க விடயங்களை அகிலன் ஆதங்கத்தோடு எழுப்பின விஷயங்களை வெளிநாடுகளில் இருக்கிறவர்கள் உள்ளூரோட தொடர்பு கொண்டு நிவர்த்தி செய்ய வேணும், அல்ல முயற்சிக்க வேணும் அதை கண்டு கேட்டுக்கொண்டு ஒரு நல்ல ஒரு முன்னெடுப்பு என்று தெரிவித்து விடைபெறுகிறேன். நன்றி.
மிக்க நன்றி. And thank you everyone. So we are almost done with the seminar. And I would like to quickly take 2 minutes to answer the 3 questions posed to me. And then we will move on to the vote of thanks, and that will be end of this academic seminar. But the first question asked for me was from Dr. Ahalya. She said, when I mentioned that politics needs to be separated from the study of heritage and heritage, what I really meant was the politics not in the sense of, not in the traditional sense. Because we increasingly witness that the heritage has been taken over by the political parties and the states and various groups. So that needs to be separated. On the other hand, why my understanding of politics is, where there is a power imbalance, there is politics. Wherever we see the power imbalance, there is politics. Even in the study of heritage or the articulation of heritage, there is politics. So we cannot simply escape politics. So that is I use the notion of politics in that sense. And second, the second question addressed to me was from Jacinta, and she posed the question saying that if there are fair-minded Sinhalese archaeologists in Sri Lanka, whether it would be possible to work with them and bring and focus on Tamil heritage, etc., etc. I think that is possible, but the problem is the Sri Lankan state has completely monopolized the idea of heritage and Sinhala Buddhist heritage. And most of the progressive, the so-called fair-minded Sinhalese archaeologists in the past, most of them have become part and parcel of this Sri Lankan government industry, whether it was Sudarshan Senivaratna or there are various other people whom we used to work with. So they are not, even though they are fair-minded, but the problem with them is they are not willing to be in solidarity with us. Fair-minded is a different thing. Being in solidarity is something else. And the third question that was addressed to me was by Gobi Ratnam. He wanted me to explain about what's our contribution to universal civilization. I have written lots of articles on that one, Gobi, so I will forward some of the articles to you in the interest of time. But all I can very quickly say is that, yes, the notion of secularism from our heritage is extremely important. And that is one of the key. And the second key is that in our heritage, we used to go beyond religions, particularly when it comes to ethics and morals. அறமும் விழுமியமும். இந்த அறங்களுக்கும் விழுமியங்களுக்கும் அவற்றை நாங்கள் மதங்களுக்குள் மட்டும்தான் தேட வேண்டும் என்ற மரபு எங்களுக்கு இல்லை. Our heritage tells us we do not have to look for and go for ethics and moral only to the religions. We can go beyond that. The good example is Palware. So that is what I wanted to say. And thank you, everyone. Now I would like to invite Roshini Ramesh to give a vote of thanks. Roshini is a social activist running an award-winning neighborhood support group in Horsley and a freelance broadcaster. She's a former CARE member of TWDF, human rights activist, and entrepreneur. So Roshini Ramesh will give us a word of thanks now. Hello? Are you there, Roshini?
He's not here.
If Roshini is not around, Shavina, so who's going to deliver the vote of thanks? Is Shavina there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Yeah, I'm not too sure what's happened to Roshni. But I can give a brief thanks. Yeah, so firstly, thank you to all the speakers. I think we've had, and I'm sure you'll agree, some very thought-provoking talks. And yeah, lots of different topics, which we've seen lots of different connections with. So yeah, thank you all for participating and sharing with us. I want to also give a really big thank you to Professor Charon for chairing the whole event and keeping everything going on track and giving his remarks as well. I would also, I should have said this at the beginning, but thank